Hello there, people of the internet. Today we're going to talk about submachine guns. I always have a fascination with submachine guns, not only because of the history behind them, but how simple they can be and how effective they can be. But I think we're going to talk about their development and where they are today and what's replaced them today. But before that, we got to start from like the very beginning. So black powder rifles, everybody knows about black powder rifles. I'm not really going to go into a span of that. After black powder rifles, they adapted repeating rifles, meaning the big governments of the world at the time period. Repeating rifles became the modern arms, the modern technology. This right here is not really representative of that. This right here is just a 9130, but this is what we're going to use to represent that. More of an 1891 pattern would be more of an accurate representation, but I do not currently have one that I want to show off on this channel. But after smokeless powder was invented, pretty much every country adopted some sort of repeating rifle like this or very similar to this. This right here is Russia's version of it, but they're all pretty much either 5 round, 10 round, 6 rounds, somewhere in that capacity. Some sort of 5 to 10 round magazine capacity bolt action rifle that these countries were using back in the day. It wasn't until the First World War that they discovered that they needed some sort of more effective tool because tactics and times were changing. These right here were fine for the traditional kinds of warfare that a lot of these countries were doing, but World War I was a completely different ball game. And World War I was where we really saw the submachine gun actually start to exist. We'll get into that in just a moment here. Let me talk to you about this bolt action repeating rifle. This wasn't always the case, but very quickly were bolt action rifles. They discovered that they needed to load them faster, and many of them are loaded from it, well, not in block. Some of them were, I guess, like your Mannlicher styles, but we're not going to get into that whole spiel. A lot of your bolt action rifles, just to try and make them a faster loading system, they would load with clips just like this. This is just a cheap Chinese knockoff clip. That's why my rounds are falling all over each other like this. These Russian rifles are particularly notorious for having really crappy loading clips. And now I get to play with that as I cram these bad boys in there. Still faster than pulling one round at a time out of your pocket and cramming them into your rifle. But in an attempt to try and make rifles faster to load, they would send these rifles out with these in-block clips. Semi-automatics did exist back then, but they weren't really all that mainstream. Just the technology didn't exist. Semi-automatics to us nowadays, just because we have the knowledge that we have, they're so simple and basic. But back then, if you look at any semi-automatics from World War I, they're always way overly complex. And they weren't really suitable to the brutalities of the trench warfare that they were facing. But that's a whole other spiel for a whole other story. This right here, by far, was the most common style of rifle. Now I have 5 rounds inside of this magazine. I may as well launch them downrange because I'm out here at the gun range. I have a plethora of targets out there. We're gonna go for our bowling pins here first, because why the hell not? You know, I actually hit these bowling pins with a 44 Magnum one time, and the 44 Magnum did not go through, and I was wholeheartedly surprised at that. I was expecting 44 Magnum to absolutely blow these bowling pins apart. Let's go for the Atkins book out there. Oh, that Atkins book no longer exists. We got 1 round left. Let's go for the steel. Yep, there goes that steel. Alright, so 5 rounds of high-powered ammunition. This right here is legitimately rifle ammunition. During World War I, combat was oftentimes taking place very up close and personal. Smokeless powder, the governments of the world thought that they were going to be fighting at way longer distances than they actually were. And then World War I came along and trench warfare was a thing, and you had people with these long, I mean, the rifles that they had in World War I were actually longer than this one right here, and this one is quite long. They had these long rifles with long bayonets attached, getting up close and personal with each other, and they were just not very good fighting weapons in the trenches of World War I. So World War I led to the development of the concept of the submachine gun, which was originally going to be the trench sweeper. This right here is what we're going to use as a representation of that. This right here is a Commander Mark III, made by Volunteer Enterprise. It's just a Thompson M1A1 replica or look-alike or whatever it is that you want to call it. But this right here is what we're going to use to represent the submachine gun that was made by the United States Forces, originally known as the trench sweeper. The Thompson, at the time, operated off of a bushlock system. If you don't know anything about that, basically two different metals rubbing against each other, different friction points, they would like lock against each other, or so the concept was. Turns out that was not the case. It didn't have a buttstock on it. The idea was to just go through the trenches, basically with your Thompson like this, and hose down the trenches with 45 ACP rounds. And it was supposed to be way more effective than raiding the trenches with some bolt-action rifles, and I imagine that it would be. I don't think that the Thompson submachine gun got any real significant use in World War I. It was just too late for it to show up in the trenches before the war ended. However, the concept stuck around, and the Thompson submachine gun, along with various other submachine guns that were very predominant in World War II. World War II was a lot of urban warfare and a lot of up-close and personal warfare. You had people fighting at fairly long distances, and although small arms technology had progressed to the point to where many countries had semi-automatics on a regular basis, such as the United States with their M1 Garand here. These are still full-powered rifle cartridges firing at, well, they're supposed to fire at a fair distance, but a lot of times in urban combat, you'd be fighting room to room with these full-powered rifles. That is one of the best times to send in the people that have the submachine guns with the 30-round magazines, and they can just dump a lot of lead down in small areas. You don't really want to use a submachine gun if the distance you're fighting at is, 300 yards away. That's whenever you'd want a rifle like this. Now, just because I'm out here and I have this rifle with me, I can't not send a few rounds downrange. So I don't know how many I have in this magazine, honestly. But let's send them. Oh, mama. I love the M1 Garand. Oh, failure to feed. Look at that. I have an aftermarket. Alright, I'm assuming that this round is just not good. This right here is surplus Turkish ammunition, and that round just did not want a chamber, so I'm not going to risk firing it. Like I said, I have no idea how many rounds I have left in this thing, but that's not going to stop me from sending some rounds downrange. Oh, Nelly, I guess that was the last round. So, a lot of countries during World War II had some sort of semi-automatic rifle. Russia was another one with their SVT. I think that was the one. Go ahead and pick up my in-block clip here before I lose it. But Russia had the SVT along with the Mosin Nagant. The United States was also using bolt-action rifles at the time. But basically every country, whether or not they had semi-automatic rifles or bolt-action rifles, they also had some sort of submachine gun. This right here is a 45 ACP. Like I said, it is a M1A1 look-alike. It is not an actual M1A1. Obviously, this is a closed bolt. The profile does not at all fit. The bottom receiver looks like it's just cast metal, but it'll serve as our representation. I've got a couple of rounds in this thing too. Let's go ahead and send them downrange. All right. I think that was all the ammo I had in this thing. Yep. So basically every country had something like this that they were using. They wanted them for World War I because it was very much discovered that a weapon like that would be very effective in World War I. Typically your submachine gun fired a pistol caliber cartridge. The countries that were using these submachine guns in particular wanted ammunition interchangeability between their submachine guns and their whatever sidearm caliber that they were using. The Russians did it, the United States did it, the Germans did it, the Japanese did it. Basically, everybody did it whenever they could do it. The Germans at the time of World War II were using this right here. This is a bolt-action Kar 98. Nothing real special about it. It's just a 5-round bolt-action rifle, chambered in 8mm Mauser. This right here was their standard infantry rifle. At the time, I mean, it was effective. And up until World War II, this right here was pretty much cutting-edge technology. But once the development of semi-automatic rifles came to be, then this very much became obsolete. But Germany at the time still had a very good submachine gun that is still predominantly used in multiple places around the world. This right here is what we're going to use to represent it. This right here is the MP40. I believe it began development as the MP38, if memory serves. Before that, they still had various amounts of submachine guns, but they were trying to get cheaper, easier to manufacture submachine guns. Eventually the MP40 became a stamped submachine gun with just a tube receiver and whatnot. Very simple, very rudimentary, straight blowback, nothing real special about it, just an open bolt submachine gun. Very, very simple to use, but very effective. Most of your countries adopted some sort of open bolt submachine gun during the Second World War and before, just because of how simple, cheap, and effective that they were. Like I said, just like with the Thompson, this right here is not something that you'd be fighting out to rifle level distances. This is something that you'd be fighting, you know, in trenches or house to house, room to room. This is something that you'd be fighting with up close and personal. Now, Germany. Oh, Germany. Germany, those crafty bastards. And I mean crafty more than just the beer. They were not the first ones to think of the idea, but they developed what would become the most mainstream style of this rifle. This is the Sturmgewehr, or however it is that you feel like pronouncing it. I'm not German. Well, I am German, but I don't speak German. The Sturmgewehr 44, MP44, depending on the time that you're talking about. This right here is the first genuine rifle that was intended to replace both the bolt-action rifle and the submachine gun. It uses an intermediate cartridge. At the time, Germany had realized that combat distances were taking place at way closer distances, usually, than they originally thought was going to be the case. So their full-powered 8mm Mauser bolt-action rifles, which they thought they were going to be fighting at distance way farther than they actually were going to be, they designed those rifles to be basically powerful enough to touch out to these massive distances. But they deemed those rifles to be basically overkill in terms of power, and capacity and functionality were significantly underkill. Germany wanted to make a rifle that could touch out to the distances that actual combat was taking place at, but could also be swapped to full auto and used as a submachine gun in the event that they found themselves in some up-close and personal battles. And this right here was what they developed. This right here is just a 22 long rifle replica of a Sturmgewehr, but this right here is more than enough to at least cover what it is that we're talking about here. So they basically took the 8mm Mauser round, shortened it to 8mm Kurtz. I believe the bullet diameter is exactly the same to simplify the process. And what it was just a 30 caliber or 30 round magazine of the same 8mm caliber. And the idea was that this rifle would not be able to touch out to the distances that the bolt-action rifles were able to touch out to, but it was able to touch out enough to be able to handle the combat situations that they were handling. Not only that, but the round was not only powerful enough to touch out to the distances they were handling, but it was also unpowerful enough, that's a word now, unpowerful enough to be controllable enough to use as a submachine gun in the event that you found yourself, you know, in enemy trenches or in a house, bunker, wherever it is that you're fighting. The idea was to equip all of the soldiers with a rifle like this and replace the bolt-action rifle and the submachine gun pretty much entirely, except for specialty roles. But the war ended and Germany lost before they could equip their soldiers with this right here. Lots of speculation going on. If Germany got their act together and managed to equip their soldiers with more of these, along with the ammunition necessary to run them, then they may very well have turned the tide of the war. Now, with the adoption of the intermediate cartridge and rifles that can be both rifles and submachine guns, that is a concept that we still use today. This right here is Armalite's Model 15, which came from their Model 10, the AR-10. I would love to get my hands on one of those. I'm likely going to get one of those Brownells replicas, just because I think that'd be really sweet to have. But that's just me thinking out loud. This right is the AR-15, which is basically a scaled-down version of the AR-10, which was chambered in .308, which was quite the powerful round. It is technically an intermediate round, but with a full power rifle ballistic coefficient to it. So modern militaries decided that right there, well, most modern militaries, many modern militaries decided that right there was still too powerful, and they actually jumped down to 7.62 by 39, 5.45, 5.56, some sort of true intermediate caliber round, versus the very, very high-powered 7.62 NATO round or .308, depending on what it is that you're actually using. But the idea of the intermediate cartridge is still used today. .223 in full auto is very controllable. You could definitely use this to fill the role of a submachine gun if you ever found yourself in a situation of needing a submachine gun. But the .223 is also quite effective out to about 600 yards before it really starts to lose enough velocity to stop being effective. But most of your combat in modern situations is either going to be taken care of by a drone or a helicopter, or is going to be within 600 yards. Now, there are still submachine guns in use, modern use, typically in police forces and forces that don't necessarily need full power cartridges, or forces that don't necessarily want to worry about over-penetration, like a lot of your pistol caliber carbines are used by people who don't want to go through their walls, their neighbor's walls, you know, the house down the street. So they'll use a pistol caliber carbine, which is the equivalency of a semi-automatic submachine gun. A lot of times whenever you're wanting to suppress something as well, to get something that is really, really quiet, you would want a round that is not overly powerful, that does not break the sound barrier, and pistol caliber carbines or submachine guns serve that role very, very well. Okay, well, I have a couple of rounds in this AR-15. I have not shot this AR-15 in a little while. That's kind of why I packed some rounds into it. Wow, my red dot is not bright at all. I mean, it will work for the purposes that we're currently using it. So I'm assuming that my battery is dying on this thing. No, it came to life. Now it's very bright. Maybe my battery cover here is just loose or something. I'll have to retighten that. Now, there are countries still out there that use submachine guns in their military forces, but those are typically not in modern armies. Most of your modern armies have adopted some sort of intermediate cartridge firing rifle that can serve both as a rifle and a submachine gun. However, of course, there are cases where you need a full power rifle to touch out to real significant distances. Those do exist in militaries as well, but they're not standard issue like the M1 Garand or the Kar-98 was back during the days of full powered rifles and submachine guns. Submachine guns are also not standard issue like they were back in the day of full power rifles and submachine guns. Standard issue is everybody gets something that could basically serve as one or the other depending on what situation it is that you're getting yourself into. Alright, well, this was fun. I wanted to make this video for a little while because I have the means to do so, and I own the equipment necessary. Oh boy. I'm looking at this Turkish routing. It is a little bit on the screwed up side, so this is not going into my very beautiful, very delectable, oh god, CMP refurbishment 1952 production M1 Garand without a damn scratch on it. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. Let me know what your thoughts are down below. This was basically just a fun video that I decided to make because it would let me show off and shoot multiple of my firearms, which is always a good time. I wasn't sure what I felt like shooting today, so I was like, why don't we make a video that requires me shooting many things? Now, that being said, I have somewhere else to be, so thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to the channel for more. As you can see from the card down there, I do this stuff all the time. If you like the video, that helps out with YouTube's algorithm. Description down below has a bunch of links to all sorts of stuff, and I think that's everything in the YouTube outro that I normally say. Email sign-up lists, link down below. Lots of behind the scenes and plans, futures, opinions, etc., etc. Okay, now I get to carry all these guns back to the house. Ah, goodness. I might have to make more than one trip. I will have to make more than one trip. Thanks for watching, guys. You guys go off. Have a Fantastic day. Alright, M1 Garen first.
Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.